Chapter 3. The first thing I realized was the absence of the cold. It was replaced by a suffocating, scratchy heat that clung to my skin like a thick layer of sweat. I opened my eyes, fighting through the heavy sludge of human exhaustion. The ceiling above me was a plain white plaster. It glowed with the faint orange cast of a street lamp filtering through closed window blinds. Somewhere deep within the concrete walls of the building, a water pipe groaned. It was a miserably mundane sound, grounding me instantly in a reality I despised. Out of sheer desperate denial, I closed my eyes and reached inside of myself one last time. I searched for the roaring furnace of red magic, hoping the freezing rain had merely suppressed it. I waited for the spark. I waited for the rush of absolute authority. Nothing, just an echoing biological void. I pushed myself up onto my elbows. My muscles immediately screamed in protest. Every joint felt like it had been packed with crushed glass. I looked down at myself, expecting to see the heavy, mud-covered folds of my crimson velvet dress. Instead, I was drowning in a faded black t-shirt. The word Metallica was printed across the chest in jagged, cracking letters. My legs were swallowed by cheap, oversized gray sweatpants. I shifted against the mattress and felt a scratchy fabric tag rubbing against my lower spine. H&M. A mortal had undressed me. While I was unconscious, completely at the mercy of the world, a fragile human girl had stripped off my ruined armor, wiped the freezing street mud from my skin, and dressed me in these awful shapeless things. The humiliation was acidic. It burned the back of my throat like bile. I forced myself to sit up completely, taking in the rest of the room. It was a tiny square space. The walls were plastered with posters of nebulas, galaxies, and brightly colored star clusters. A professional-looking telescope stood proudly by the window. Its lens was pointed blindly at the cloudy gray sky. Estrella's room, a desperate little shrine to the cosmos. I remembered standing in the dark a lifetime ago. I remembered pulling a tiny yellowish star from the sky and tossing it right into her hands to teach her a lesson about looking at the ground. A god dropping a miracle into a fragile human life. The sheer irony of it sat heavy on my chest. Now I was a stray dog, shivering on her squeaky mattress. Across the room, a tall mirror hung on the back of the wooden door. I stared at my reflection and felt my stomach drop. My hair, usually a flawless mane of dark perfection, was a tangled, dull mess plastered against my skull. My skin was horribly pale, damaged by yellowish bruises along my jawline and collarbone. I ran my tongue over my teeth, pressing against the flat, useless human enamel where my fangs should have been. The royal, terrifying aura of the Red Queen was completely extinguished. I just looked like a sick, beaten teenager. The door handle clicked, interrupting my miserable self-inspection. Asti walked in. She was carrying a steaming ceramic mug and a plastic box of basic medical supplies. She was still wearing the same clothes from the night before, and the dark circles under her eyes looked even deeper in the artificial light of the hallway behind her. I immediately tried to pull the authority back into my spine. I ignored the agonizing throb in my ribs and squared my shoulders. I fixed her with the coldest glare I could summon. "Where is my dress?" I demanded. My voice was still a broken, ragged gasp, but I tried to lace it with as much venom as my ruined vocal cords could handle. Asti didn't flinch. She simply walked over and set the mug down on the bedside table. "In a garbage bag," she said flatly, not breaking eye contact. "It was a biohazard. You were covered in street mud and blood. I wasn't going to let you bleed all over my bed." She looked at me without a trace of respect. The girl who had once cried on a cliff edge was gone. I had to drag you out of the hallway, Asti continued. Her voice was tight. You were freezing, your pulse was racing like you were having a heart attack, so tell me the truth. Where is your magic, Martha? The question hit me like a physical hit. It was the one thing I couldn't bear to hear spoken aloud. I don't need magic to deal with you, I spat, deflecting with pure hostility. I threw the heavy cotton blanket off my legs and planted my bare feet on the cheap laminate floor. I needed to stand, I needed to tower over her, to force her to look up at me and remember exactly what kind of monster had walked into her life. I pushed myself upwards, putting all my weight on my legs. They instantly buckled. A sudden, violent spasm seized my lungs. A rattling cough tore out of my throat, tasting sharply of copper and dirt. It felt like I was coughing up razor blades. I doubled over, entirely losing my balance as the room spun wildly around me. Hands grabbed my shoulders, human hands. Asti caught me before my knees smashed into the floor. She wasn't gentle, but her grip was steady. She carried me backwards, struggling slightly under my dead weight, until the backs of my legs hit the mattress and I collapsed onto the bed. I wanted to shove her away. I wanted to burn her for daring to put her hands on me in a moment of weakness. But I couldn't even lift my arms. My chest surged as I stared at the laminate floor, completely defeated by my own fragile biology. I hated her for seeing it, but more than that, I hated myself for confirming it. It's gone, I whispered. The words tasted like ash on my tongue. The magic, it's gone. Asti stood over me for a long moment. She didn't gloat and she didn't look surprised. The pity in her eyes just deepened into something heavier. She opened the plastic box, took out 2 white pills and placed them on the nightstand next to the mug. Take those. They are for the fever, she said gently, and drink the tea. I looked at the pills. Human medicine, the ultimate proof of my degradation, but my head was throbbing so violently that my pride simply caved in. I picked them up, tossed them into my mouth and washed them down with a hot liquid. It was cheap, bagged black tea. It tasted like bitter water, but the warmth radiating through the ceramic was the only thing keeping my teeth from chattering. Just as I lowered the mug, a phone buzzed violently against the wooden nightstand. Then it buzzed again, and again, a relentless, rapid-fire vibration. The screen lit up the dark corner of the room, flashing with a wall of notifications. I watched Asti's eyes dart towards the device. Her facial muscles went completely stiff. The weary exhaustion in her expression shifted instantly into something else, a very specific, quiet terror. It wasn't the fear of monsters or magic, it was the suffocating, mundane dread of a human being trapped in a social nightmare. Her hands actually shook as she snatched the phone and flipped it face down so quickly she nearly knocked over a box of bandages. She didn't look at the screen again, but her breathing grew shallow and uneven. I watched her closely. I might have lost my magic, but I was still an apex predator. I recognized the behavior of cornered prey when I saw it. Human weakness was suffocating her right here in this room, slowly eating her alive. Whatever miracle I had given her back then, it clearly hadn't protected her from the cruelty of her own kind. They won't stop, I said quietly, breaking the heavy silence. Asti looked up at me, startled. Who? The people looking for me, the ones who tore my power out. I took a slow, shallow breath, testing the limits of my bruised ribs. If I go back out onto those streets right now, they will find me. And if they find me, I die. I looked at her. A dethroned queen sitting in an oversized band shirt, looking at an ordinary human teenager fighting her own invisible wars. There was no leverage here. There was no grand manipulation. There was only the brutal reality of mutual survival. "Let me stay here," I said. It wasn't a command, it was a plea, and I absolutely hated it. Asti looked down at the flipped-over phone on her nightstand, staring at the plastic casing as if it was a bomb waiting to go off. Then she looked back at me. She saw the desperation in my eyes, the exact same desperate exhaustion she was carrying herself. "Fine," she said quietly. Her shoulders slumped. "You can stay, but you follow my rules." I didn't argue. I didn't have the breath to. I lifted the mug to my lips and swallowed another mouthful of the bitter tea. The Red Queen, the terror of the corridor, now kept alive by the reluctant mercy of a high school girl.